There are discoveries that change history, and then there are discoveries that refuse to stay buried. In the winter of 1922, deep inside the Valley of the Kings, a team of archaeologists stood at the edge of something they did not yet understand. For years, the desert had given up its secrets, one tomb at a time. Pharaohs, queens, treasures long forgotten. But by then, most believed there was nothing left to find, nothing untouched, nothing hidden. They were wrong, because beneath layers of rock, sand, and silence, there was one tomb the world had missed. Not robbed, not broken into, not erased by time. A tomb that had been waiting for over 3,000 years. The name inside it meant almost nothing to the modern world. Tutankhamun, a boy king, a ruler who lived briefly and died mysteriously. History barely remembered him until the day his tomb was opened. The man who found it was not searching for a curse. He was searching for proof. Proof that something still remained undiscovered in a place the world thought it already understood. When Howard Carter uncovered the first step leading down into the earth, he knew immediately that this was different. The air felt heavier, the silence deeper. Each layer of debris removed revealed something impossible. A sealed doorway, intact, unbroken, untouched by human hands since the moment it had been closed in ancient Egypt. For a moment, everything stopped. Because this should not exist. Not here. Not after thousands of years. When the final seal was broken, Carter made a small hole in the doorway. He held up a candle. And for the first time in over 3 millennia, light entered the tomb. What he saw inside did not just change archaeology. It changed the story forever. Gold. Everywhere. Objects untouched by time. Chariots, statues, jewelry, weapons perfectly preserved as if they had been placed there only yesterday. And at the center of it all, something far more unsettling. A coffin, nested within layers of protection. Guarded. Sealed. Deliberately hidden. This was no ordinary burial. This was a king who had been prepared for eternity. But ancient Egypt did not just preserve the dead. It protected them. The Egyptians believed death was not the end. It was a transition. And the tomb was not just a resting place. It was a barrier, a line between the living and something else. Something that should never be disturbed. At first, the discovery brought excitement. Fame. Global attention. Newspapers across America and Europe exploded with headlines. The greatest archaeological find in history. But within weeks, the tone began to change, because something strange started happening. Not inside the tomb, outside it. The first death came quietly, almost too ordinary to notice. Lord Carnarvon, the man who funded the entire expedition, fell ill shortly after entering the tomb. At first, it seemed minor, a small infection. Nothing unusual, but his condition worsened rapidly. Doctors couldn't explain why. And then, just like that, he was gone. Dead. The official cause seemed simple, but what happened next was not. At the exact moment of his death, reports claimed that the lights in Cairo suddenly went out. Miles away in England, his dog reportedly began howling and died at that same moment. Coincidence? Maybe. But then it happened again. And again. People connected to the tomb began to die. Not all at once. Not in a clear pattern. But just enough. to make people uncomfortable. An archaeologist, a visitor, a worker who had been inside. Each death explained, yet somehow not explained. And that's when the whispers began. Not from scientists, not from officials, but from the public, from newspapers, from people who were watching something they couldn't fully understand. They called it the curse of the pharaoh, a belief that somewhere within that tomb, something had been awakened. Not a ghost, not a myth, but a consequence. A warning written not in words, but in events. Because here's the truth that made it even more disturbing. No official curse inscription was ever found inside Tutankhamun's tomb. No clear message, no direct threat. And yet, the deaths continued, which raises a question that still hasn't been answered. If there was no curse, then what exactly was killing these people? Because sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are not the ones we can prove. They are the ones we can't explain. At first, it was easy to ignore. One death could be coincidence, too unfortunate. But when the number kept rising, people started paying attention. Because this was no longer just a story about a tomb. It was becoming a pattern no one could fully explain. After the death of Lord Carnarvon, the world expected the strange rumors to fade. They didn't. Instead, they grew louder. More names were added to the list. People who had been inside the tomb. People who had handled the artifacts. Even individuals who had only briefly visited the site. One by one, they began to die. Some suddenly, some slowly. But what made it unsettling wasn't just the deaths themselves. It was how unpredictable they were. A healthy man would fall ill overnight. Another would suffer a mysterious infection no doctor could clearly identify. Some died under circumstances so ordinary, they almost felt staged. Natural causes, accidents, complications, each case explained. And yet, something about the timing felt wrong. Too close, too connected. As newspapers in the United States and Europe followed the story, headlines became more dramatic. The pharaoh's revenge. The death curse of Egypt. Public fascination turned into fear. Because people weren't just reading about history anymore. They were watching something unfold in real time. And the numbers kept climbing. By some accounts, more than 20 individuals connected to the tomb died within a few years. Not all directly, not all immediately, but enough to create a chilling narrative. Enough to make people ask the question no scientist wanted to answer. What if this wasn't coincidence? Because even those who didn't believe in curses began to feel something was off. There were too many variables, too many unknowns, too many moments where logic seemed incomplete. But science did not stay silent. Researchers began searching for rational explanations. One theory pointed to something invisible. Ancient bacteria, toxins sealed inside the tomb for thousands of years. When the chamber was opened, these particles could have been released into the air. Inhaling them might cause illness, infections, even death. It sounded reasonable. Scientific. Safe, but there was a problem. Not everyone who entered the tomb got sick. In fact, some of the closest individuals to the discovery lived for decades afterward, including the man who opened it, Howard Carter himself. He lived for years after the discovery. No sudden illness, no mysterious death. No curse. which made the situation even more confusing. Because if this was a biological reaction, why did it affect some people and not others? Another theory suggested psychological fear, the power of belief. If people truly believed they were cursed, stress and anxiety could weaken the body, trigger illness, even lead to death. But again, the pattern didn't fully fit. Some victims didn't even believe in the curse. Some weren't afraid. Some barely understood the story at all. And yet, they were still part of it, still connected, still gone. Then there were the cases that didn't fit any explanation. Sudden accidents, unusual timing, events that felt random, but somehow linked. Individually, each story could be dismissed, but together, they formed something harder to ignore. A pattern without a clear cause. And that is what made it dangerous. Because the human mind is built to find meaning, to connect dots, even when those connections shouldn't exist. So the question changed. It was no longer, is the curse real? It became something more unsettling. Why does it feel real? Because the truth is, humans are not just afraid of death. We are afraid of what we don't understand. And the story of Tutankhamun had become something larger than history. It had become a mystery that refused to be solved. A series of events that sat uncomfortably between science and belief. And as the world watched, divided between logic and fear, one thing became clear. Whatever had been uncovered in that tomb, it had not finished telling its story. And the most disturbing part, the final answers, might be even darker than the curse itself.
By the time the world stopped counting the deaths, the story had already taken on a life of its own. It was no longer just about a tomb, or a king, or even the people who had died. It had become something far more powerful, a legend, and like all powerful legends, it refused to fade. For years, scientists, historians, and investigators tried to break it apart, to separate fact from fear, to prove that what people were seeing wasn't real. And slowly, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Yes, some of the deaths had logical explanations: infections, medical conditions, environmental exposure, even simple coincidence. When examined individually, most cases made sense. Nothing supernatural, nothing impossible. But here's the part that still unsettles experts today. When those same events are viewed together, they feel different. Not because they prove a curse, but because they expose something deeper about human nature. Because the real power of the curse was never in the tomb. It was in the story. From the moment the discovery was announced, newspapers around the world began competing for attention. Headlines became more dramatic, more exaggerated, more terrifying. Because fear sells. The idea of an ancient curse protecting a forgotten king was too powerful to ignore. And the more people read about it, the more real it became. But there is another layer to this story, one that goes beyond media, beyond coincidence, and even beyond science. Ancient Egypt was built on belief. Not just belief in gods, but belief in order, balance, and protection. The tomb of a pharaoh was not simply a grave. It was a carefully designed system meant to preserve the soul for eternity. Every object placed inside had meaning. Every ritual had purpose. And every barrier existed for a reason. To disturb that system was not just physical. It was symbolic, a violation of something sacred. And even if there was no literal curse carved into the walls, The concept of protection was real because the tomb was never meant to be opened. Not by outsiders, not by the living. So what happened when it was, did something supernatural escape? Or did something far more powerful begin to spread? An idea, a belief, a fear that moved from person to person, growing stronger with every story told. Because here's the truth most people don't expect. The human mind can turn coincidence into certainty. It can turn patterns into meaning. It can turn fear into reality. And once that process begins, it becomes almost impossible to stop. The deaths connected to the tomb of Tutankhamun may never have been caused by a curse, but the impact they created was very real. They changed how the world viewed ancient Egypt. They shaped one of the most famous legends in modern history. And they proved something that is far more unsettling than any supernatural explanation. That sometimes we don't need a curse to create fear. We create it ourselves. Today, the treasures of Tutankhamun are displayed in museums, studied, analyzed, understood more than ever before. And yet, the story still lingers. The question still remains. Not was the curse real, but something far more uncomfortable. Why do we still feel like it was? Because deep beneath the science, beneath the facts, beneath the explanations, there is still a part of the story that refuses to be fully understood. And maybe that's exactly how it was meant to be.